Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are looking at a huge question. How did the world's very first attempt at global peace fail so spectacularly that it actually paved the way for the deadliest war in human history? So picture this. It's 1920. The First World War, with its unbelievable devastation, has just ended. Leaders from all over the world get together to try and build something new. Their goal? It was incredibly ambitious, born from all that trauma and hope, to create a global group that would make sure a war like that could never, ever happen again. And yet, that beautiful promise was completely shattered. Less than 2 decades after this new organization was founded, the world plunged right back into conflict, only this time it was even more destructive and widespread. So what on earth happened? What went so wrong? To really understand the path to World War II, you kind of have to do an autopsy on the failure that came before it, the League of Nations. You see, the whole idea, which was really championed by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, came directly from the horror of the trenches. He pictured a world where countries could just talk out their problems, in a big assembly hall, making war itself pretty much obsolete. But, and this is a big but, there was this massive gap between the dream and the reality. The League was built on this really powerful concept called collective security, the idea that an attack on any member is an attack on all of them. The problem? Well, it had 2 huge, fatal flaws right from the get-go. First, it had no army, no way to actually enforce its decisions. And second, its biggest cheerleader, the United States, never even joined. So you've basically got a court with no police force. And look, these weren't just problems on paper. The League's authority was about to get tested in a big way. And not in Europe, but thousands of miles away in Asia. So you've got Japan, a rising military power, and it's desperate for natural resources. It sees an opportunity. Its army moves in and seizes Manchuria, a huge, resource-rich part of China. This was a clear-cut, no doubt about it, act of aggression. The whole world was watching, and at its headquarters in Geneva, the League did exactly what it was supposed to do. It debated, it investigated, and then, boom, it universally condemned what Japan had done. The hope was that this kind of global peer pressure would be enough. But Japan's response was, well, it was blunt. It was defiant. They flat out rejected the League's authority, basically telling the entire world, thanks, but your opinion doesn't matter to us. And that was the moment the League's total powerlessness was put on display for everyone to see. With no army and no real power to do anything, all it could do was watch as Japan's diplomats literally just walked out of the room. Japan kept Manchuria, the League was humiliated, and a really, really dangerous precedent had just been set. So, if Manchuria was the first crack in the foundation, the next crisis was about to shatter it completely. An even more shameless challenge popped up, this time in Africa, and it pushed the League to its absolute breaking point in what everyone was calling its supreme test. Things started escalating with alarming speed. Fascist Italy, under Benito Mussolini, starts a border clash with Abyssinia, what we now call Ethiopia. It was a flimsy excuse for a full-scale invasion, all part of his dream to build a new Roman Empire. So all eyes turned back to the League. Was this time going to be different? The Emperor of Abyssinia, Haile Selassie, actually traveled to Geneva himself and gave this incredibly powerful, desperate speech. He wasn't just pleading for his own country, he was throwing down a challenge to the entire world. He framed this as the ultimate test of the League's big promise to protect small nations from powerful bullies. The League did take action. It put economic sanctions on Italy. But honestly, they were a joke. They were full of loopholes, nobody really enforced them, and, critically, they didn't stop the sale of oil. The one thing Mussolini absolutely needed to fuel his war machine. Italy's modern army just rolled over Abyssinia. The League had failed its supreme test, miserably. But why? Why did it all fall apart? Why did the League's most powerful members, Britain and France, more or less just stand there and let this happen? Well, it wasn't just a lack of guts. The failure was rooted in 3 really deep problems that had totally paralyzed Britain and France, leaving them both unwilling and unable to act. I mean, just look at the stark reality here. Both of these nations were just shadows of their former selves. They were psychologically shattered by the horrific losses of World War I. Their economies were completely crippled by the Great Depression. And their militaries? They were in no shape for another major war. Britain's army was basically a small police force, and France was hiding behind its defensive Maginot Line. In their minds, starting a fight with Italy just wasn't worth the risk. So, with the League of Nations now totally exposed as a paper tiger, what do you think happened? Well, for the aggressive dictators in Europe, it was like a giant green light. It seemed like the rules of the road for international behavior, well, they just didn't have an enforcer anymore. First up, just a few months after the Abyssinia crisis, Hitler marches his troops back into the Rhineland, which was supposed to be a demilitarized zone. It was a blatant violation of the Treaty of Versailles. And Britain and France, they did nothing. Next, in 1938, he annexes his homeland of Austria. An entire independent country was just wiped off the map. And again, the world just watched. Then he breaks his famous promise of peace in our time and just swallows up the rest of Czechoslovakia. You can see the pattern here, right? It's like dominoes falling. Each aggressive act was met with international silence, and that silence just emboldened the dictators to take the next bigger risk. So you see, the story of the League isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It is a stark warning. It forces us to ask a question that is just as relevant today as it was back then. When international rules are broken, who has the power? And maybe more importantly, who has the will to actually enforce them? Because as the 1930s proved, when that will disappears, the cost can be absolutely catastrophic.